Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon. My pronouns are she, her, hers. This podcast is being recorded on the land of the Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga people. It's so important to me that I continue to learn about this land, the indigenous people who cared for it for so long, and the history and culture of my settler and immigrant ancestors. I'm also a Canadian yoga teacher, mother, entrepreneur, and a forever student who loves to ask questions. And that's why I think podcasting is a good fit for me. I get to ask questions to amazing people like today's guests about a topic I love, yoga, and then share it so that we can learn together. I also work as the founder of Pelvic Health Professionals, a place where movement educators and healthcare professionals collaborate and learn the most up-to-date information regarding pelvic health. I'll tell you about some upcoming calls that we have happening inside of Pelvic Health Professionals later on in today's episode. If you'd like to check it out and join us, visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com. This podcast was made for you, the yoga teacher, because I know how it feels to be out here in the real world, running a business, and also learning all you can about teaching and sharing yoga. This podcast is a place where you can connect to other yoga teachers, ideas, and information so that you feel supported as you grow this yoga business. I also want to say a huge thank you because today's episode is powered by Offering Tree. I use and love this software in my own business because it automates everything: bookings, payments, Zoom links, reminders, and so much more. We have a special podcast listener discount over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. I'm also going to share a story about a phone call that I had this week where I just ended up talking about Offering Tree, and that happens very often because I do love this software. In my years of working with yoga teachers, I'm often asked, how can I feel more confident, more comfortable, and how can I become a stronger and more effective yoga teacher or yoga professional? And we've done some other episodes on this topic. Most recently was episode 326, Teach Yoga with Confidence, and episode 327, Working with Teaching Anxiety, which was a consultation call with Lindsay McMurray. I'll link to those in the show notes and some others that will help you if you are feeling like confidence is the thing that you want help with. Oh, I also want to share an update from episode 327 with Lindsay McMurray. Lindsay reached out to me in a private message and let me know that she went to teach at the recovery center and the students there loved her class. So if any of you were listening to that episode, this is the one where Lindsay was feeling afraid to even go and teach. She did it. The students loved it. And they said that they wish that they could take yoga with her every single day. So that's such a great update. Thank you for sharing that with us, Lindsay. And this is what happens when we feel confident and we feel like we're really in our space teaching as yoga teachers. And it's also really normal to doubt your teaching skills or feel like, how can I improve my teaching skills as a yoga teacher? And that's why I'm really excited that we have two special guests to share with us the 5 pillars of powerful teaching. It's going to help us all think of some things because we can always improve as yoga teachers and professionals. I'm so excited to introduce you to Sheri Fisher and Lori Holden. Sheri is an experienced yoga teacher who helps yoga teachers build confidence and bridge the gap between their yoga teacher training time and when they're out there teaching. Through professional coaching and group facilitation, Sheri helps executives build their leadership, promote teamwork, and develop strategic plans to meet their organization's mission. Lori has been practicing yoga since 2007. She's a connoisseur of truly inspiring yoga teachers. She's also an adoption coach and an expert in the complexities of adoption. If you are involved in adoption in any way, make sure to check out Lori's podcast. I'll link to it in the show notes. It's called Adoption, the Long View Podcast. I love how Lori applies the principles of yoga to her parenting of her 2 young adults, one with special needs, and also to her life, because we all know that that requires balance, flexibility, strength, and stability. And she also helps others to do the same. It's a really unique view today because we get to hear from someone who works with a lot of yoga teachers, who is a yoga teacher, that's Sheri, and also someone who takes a lot of yoga classes, practices yoga, and is completely still in the student role of things. That's Lori. As you'll hear, Sheri and Lori are sisters, and they also wrote a book together called Standing Room Only: How to Be That Yoga Teacher. The 5 Pillars of Powerful Teaching from the Root to Rise Yoga Teaching Method. They explain how this book isn't about how to pack your classes or just mirror your favorite yoga teacher. It's really about connecting with your authentic inner teacher and how you can do that. Sheri and Lori give us the breakdown on the 5 pillars: communication, character, connection, commitment, and consideration, that we need for powerful teaching, and they give us tips on how we can incorporate these pillars into our yoga classes by using the book for accountability and assessment. And they're giving 2 copies of the book to our podcast listeners in a special draw. So make sure you stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out how you can enter and possibly win one of those books. We have so much to learn from Sheri and Lori, so let's dive right in and meet them. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Sheri and Lori. It's so great to have you both here today. I'm really excited that we're going to talk about communication, character, connection, commitment, and consideration as yoga teachers. But before we get into that, Sheri, do you want to start first and tell our listeners who you are and what's the work that you do?
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting us to come on to talk about the 5 pillars of powerful teaching. My name is Sheri Fisher. I took my yoga teacher training in 2010. Prior to that, I took some training to become a life coach, and I do that with individuals, but I also now work with professionals and do executive coaching as well. And all of that has wrapped into what we've put into our book that is just being launched this spring, 2023, and it's called Standing Room Only: How to Be That Yoga Teacher. And I have my 200 hour, I got it in hot power vinyasa. And then in 2021, I got my 300 hour, and I've been teaching since 2010. And this book it's a culmination of everything that I learned during my teacher trainings, but also after, and all the experiences that go with that. And I'm just really pleased to be here and to be able to bring this information out into the yoga teaching space.
Thank you so much, Sheri. Lori, what about you? Tell our listeners what's the work that you do and who do you do it for?
Hi, Shannon. Thanks for having us. I'm so honored to be speaking with you and your audience. My name is Lori Holden, and if my voice sounds a little bit like Sheri's, it's because we have the same parents. We are sisters. We are each other's first friends, and along with our third sister, we're also best friends. So my work is actually as a teacher, but not of yoga. I'm a social studies teacher. I'm an adoption educator, and I am a yoga class taker. So I've been watching for 17 years now, kind of what makes a really good yoga teacher, where you go to the ends of the city to follow them. And what kind of yoga teacher am I kind of like, I don't need to go back to that kind of a class. What's the differences? What's the secret sauce, the magic that somebody brings in? So Sheri and I decided we had a lot to say about yoga and yoga teaching, because Sheri comes from a place of teaching group fitness classes, and she has some roots in those other things. So that's kind of what brought us together around this project.
Thank you so much for both being here. I'm really excited that we have like a yoga teacher and a yoga taker, a yoga student here today, because that's a really cool dynamic as well. So these 5 C's, and I love how you said, Lori, like this is the secret sauce of a yoga teacher, and that's what it feels like as the student. Now, I do want to like ask right off the top, do you ever get questions around like, well, aren't you just like, aren't you just a magnetic person or you're not? Or, isn't this just part of who we are as people? Like, is this something I should be honing my skills in this and working on this? Sheri, do you want to talk about like, why do yoga teachers decide to do this? And what's some of the pushback that you might hear?
I think as yoga teachers, we all come with our own gifts and our own experiences, and then we come into a yoga teacher training and we learn some curriculum. And then it's up to us with how we pull all that together and express that as yoga teachers. And so, like you were saying, some of us have that magnetism or charisma, and maybe some of us don't. But I think we all have the potential to have the magnetism to bring that all to our yoga teaching. And that's why bringing these 5 pillars of powerful teaching together is the way I think we help everybody work towards and improve on what maybe they're not as gifted at or as experienced with right now, and also pat themselves on the back and acknowledge the gifts that we do bring to it, and then how do we bring that all together to be better yoga teachers.
And then I'm so curious, Lori, do you see this applied in other places in life? Like, I know we were all talking like we're all parents, we're all like human beings. Do you see this going out beyond yoga teaching?
I do. And that magnetism that you mentioned, I don't think is a result of being introverted or extroverted or super competent in the content or still learning. The more I live and experience different facets of life, the more I'm convinced that knowing who you are and moving fully into being who you are, that authenticity, that yoking of your body, your mind, your spirit, when you can show up for people in that integrated, coherent way, that's when magnetism happens. And so our book, Standing Room Only, is about ways to help you bring that coherence, bring that integration in with exercises and things like that. We gave a lot of thought to the title of our method, which is called the Root to Rise Yoga Teaching Method. So much like yoga, it's rooting and it's rising. It's the both and of those things, but the rooting comes first, the inside first, and then the outside emanating outward.
I love this, that it's like really digging into who we are authentically. And that's where I was like, just feeling like an inner pushback of like, are you teaching me how to be like so charismatic that I can have a full packed classroom, which isn't my ideal way to teach yoga, but I get the standing room only metaphor of like, we're really working on. So thank you for clarifying that.
I'd also like to add in, we went around and around with the name, not only of the yoga teaching method, the Root to Rise Yoga Teaching Method, but also the name of the book. And when we are talking about how to be that yoga teacher, it's not necessarily to step into somebody else's persona or show up like your favorite teachers. That yoga teacher refers to the person, the inspired yoga teacher within each person, because we all are going to express our teaching differently. And so how to be that yoga teacher is how to be the one that you know you can be. And it's not to be somebody else. It's to come from the rooting and that authenticity, and then rising and sharing that with your students.
I love
and
that.
to your point, Shannon, our measure is not the number of people in your class either. It is an internal measure of, am I showing up with my own confidence, with my own gifts, with my own awareness? That's when you become that yoga teacher, and that's what's magnetic.
What I also love is that we get some time to like talk about it, because naming things is so difficult, like coming up with the name of something, and people will say to me, oh, I can't like distill this down into a name. You have to, at some point, you have to find like something that's going to fit on the cover of a book. But today in the podcast, we get to dive right into more of like what's in the book. So let's start with communication. Sheri, do you want to start there in terms of like, how can we improve our communication as yoga teachers?
I think one of the basic platforms here with the 5 pillars of powerful teaching is the essence of being a teacher. We learn in our yoga teacher trainings components of that. We learn content We learn how to stand up in front of the room. But there's also something about just the dynamics of communication. So there's a sender of information, and let's say I'm the sender. I pull that information together in a way that makes sense to me. And then I want to understand who I'm delivering my message to understand, will it make sense to them as well? And then there's a feedback loop. So it comes back to me if my students are confused, if I've confused my rights and my lefts, or some of them are turned around backwards or something like that. The feedback to me is your communication wasn't clear enough. And so communication, being the first pillar of powerful teaching, takes into account the words that you use, how you describe it, what cues you're using, even things like where you stand for demonstrations. And it also takes into account that people learn differently. So there are different ways that people take in information. There's the words that they say. It's what you hear. It's what you read. It's what you experience. And so if, for example, if I'm trying to teach a group of people how to make a sandwich, I'm going to speak differently and demonstrate differently if I'm talking to kindergarten students or if I'm talking to line cooks from the cafeteria. And as yoga teachers, when we better understand how we communicate and how that is a feedback loop, we can be more clear and more concise and precise with how we use our communication skills. And it's not just what you say. In fact, it's probably, when we did the research, 7% of it is the actual words, and the other 93% is everything else. And so it's how you're dressed, how your energetic field comes in. Do you look at people eye to eye? So there's so much to communication that I think is crucial in being a yoga teacher.
Lori, is there anything that you'd add as someone who has taken yoga classes?
Yeah, I'll just to reiterate what Sheri is saying. It's two-way street. It's not just what we're saying, but what also we're picking up. And are we attending? Are we paying attention to our students and completing that feedback loop?
Yeah, I love it. It just reminds me of this time leading a class, giving a cue, looking out, seeing everyone doing something that I hadn't planned on. And I was like, obviously, it's my communication here. I was just like kind of laughed and said, let me try that again. Because that's really cool what you're all doing. And I had this other idea where I kind of wanted to go with this. Yeah. It's that
And we
moment.
talk about that in the book, one about having compassion for yourself when you do make a mistake, because that's how we learn. And I have perfectionistic tendencies, and so I can really get on myself, like, why did I do that? But if we look at it from the lens of what happened, and even on the second side, like if I've confused them on the first side of a sequence, I can say, I have the opportunity to replay that and try again with different verbiage. And like you said, own it. Be like, okay, sorry about that. That was probably pretty confusing. Let me try again. So being human, we are not mechanical yoga teachers that when we make a mistake, it's this big deal. It's like, oh, that was sort of interesting and funny. And so, yes, I think that part of being a yoga teacher and that compassion, especially that we have for ourselves, is so important, especially when you're starting with something that's brand new to you, like teaching yoga.
And not only is that how we learn, it's also how we model, which is teaching, how we model self-compassion and getting up and just making light of it, moving forward, forgiving ourselves, laughing at ourselves. We model that for students when something like that happens. And I say that as a recovering perfectionist.
I think the three of us just found something else we all have in common. I love this. And being a student in different classes, I feel so much more connected to someone who's just made a mistake. I'm just like, they're just like a human, just like me. So it actually, I like that bit of humanness and like a little moment of levity when you can see the teacher is just like, well, there we go. That was wrong, or I missed that whole side, or yeah. Okay, let's go on to character. I'm so curious about this one. Sheri, do you want to define what this is?
Character is the second pillar of powerful teaching. And let me give a little bit of background about where these pillars came from, because I think it will help with this one in particular. I was teaching group fitness, and then I started to do workshops for health facilities and yoga studios about the pillars of powerful instruction, is what I called it, because at the time we were all called instructors. I have since moved into the philosophy that instructor is different than a teacher. An instructor can move you through poses or move you through exercise movements. A teacher brings so much more to the table, to the classroom. And so when I was doing these workshops, I would have the teachers that were there or personal trainers, and I'd ask them a question. I'd say, in the last great fitness class, yoga class that you took, what were some of the traits of the class and of the teacher that made it great? And then they write that down. And then I say, what were, and on a class that was marginal, what were some of the things that made it marginal from the class perspective and the teacher perspective? As a teacher, what are some things that contribute to a class that you teach that's great? And one that you teach that maybe wasn't as great. And so we come up with all these traits and we are talking about them. As I started to look at what they were talking about, the traits fell into these 5 categories. And so character is the one that it's taking the class beyond just an exercise class and creating a yoga experience. So it can be everything from the second the student walks in the door and you acknowledge them and you say hello, you welcome them in. It can be the lighting that you have. It can be a theme that you use. It can be music. It can be electric candles around. It can be a singing bowl. It can be a mantra. I have a yoga teacher at my new hot yoga studio in Colorado, and her name is Kat, and she brings in a harmonium. And so we start with the sound of a harmonium, oming together. Yesterday we did Shanti together. And then at the end, she goes out and gets a hand drum, and she comes in for Savasana, and she just beats the drum just nice and slow. And then she sings to us. So that's a perfect example of character. It's what makes the class an experience.
From taking classes, I can say that this comes out of finding your authentic self and playing around in that playground. I had one of my fabulous yoga teachers always brings in scented lemon lavender cloths at the end of class for Shavasana. So that's kind of his signature thing. Another one of my teachers will bring in celestial happenings and Celtic moons and kind of what's going on just with the time and the nature. So that's one of her things. So it's not gimmicky. It's not trying to find out what somebody else is doing and replicating that. It's trying to figure out where is your unique stuff that you bring to this class. And people just are so drawn to that when you're playing with that.
Oh my gosh, this reminds me of like my garden days when I taught yoga to group classes and had a garden, large garden, and would just take bags of spinach because I was like, and talk about like gardening very much informs how I talk about a lot of things, and then it just comes through. So I get it, and I love how you said this is just in us, and it's not about I'm going to take everyone chocolate today and they'll all be my friend. I mean, unless you really love chocolate, which I have done as well.
I
Doesn't it?
have done that on Valentine's Day, just fully transparent. But I think it's what Lori was saying. That's the rooting part. Like our teaching becomes an expression of who we are and where we are on our yoga journey, and still always being a beginner with the yoga, being a yoga practitioner. But that's where my best classes come from, is something that I'm working on, something that I'm reading about, something that I'm struggling with, because it comes from a very real space. And I think our students feel that.
Yep. I led a hibernation yoga, it was called. And it was because I don't do well with winter. And I was like, let's get together and like in our hibernation, let's move slowly, stick to the ground, but also get out, make ourselves kind of get out and do something at least once a week. And people loved it. And it was because I was really feeling like I just want to roll up and turn into a hibernating bear. Okay. So connection. What are your thoughts on connection?
So connection, probably to me, this is sort of the heart of the 5 pillars of powerful teaching. And connection has many facets. So we start with connection to yourself, and that's that rooting part. And it talks about tuning into yourself, listening and understanding and trusting your intuition, meditation. We even have an exercise that I had learned several years ago about tuning in and learning how to do that into your intuition. And so, really trying to help the teachers do that self study, the svadhyaya of connecting with yourself first, almost like what we were just talking about. If I'm connected with myself, I can better come across and connect with you. And so the next step of connection is connecting to your students, and that's knowing their names. It's understanding that they have two kids in college and the third one is about ready to go. And you just say, hey, how's it going with school, about ready to start? I know this is a big step for you and your family. And really, it's like the cheers factor. Everybody knows your name. You feel connected with this group of people, and the teacher becomes a really important source of that. And then as a teacher, it's connecting students with other students. And so if I have some regular students and a new student walks in, introducing the new student to somebody else and saying, you have this thing in common. You both like to bike. And I just wanted to introduce you and make that connection for you. So encouraging connection between your students. And then also it's connecting with your fellow yoga teachers, your teaching team, and with your studio owners and managers. And so, and then really just the yoga community at large. So there's a lot of different layers to connection.
So good. And do you think, Lori, as someone who goes to yoga classes, do you think this is one of the big draw factors?
Absolutely. And I think it can't be overestimated what the effect of is having your yoga, the other people practicing near you, be your friends, your connections, part of what gets you onto your mat on a regular basis. You want to see your people. You want to make that touchstone each week, or whatever that is. That's part of that's part of what makes you want to go to that person's class. That's part of being that yoga teacher, is to build all of those connections.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so true. We often would see people like visiting before class and after class in the studio that I worked at. And that's some of the best time.
It might be hard as a yoga teacher, though, because sometimes you can't get them to start class because they're all connecting with each other.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that there's times when the class is super full and I'll say, why don't you just introduce yourself to the person right next to you, just in case you touch during class. And then this whole coffee hour thing starts. And it's so great because the energy is starting to connect and flow. And then at some point you have to sort of bring everybody back.
It's true. It's very true. Everyone can start to get very comfortable with themselves. I have this rule, like I start and end on time, no matter what. Like somehow I'm like, as soon as that minute hits that, I like to start and end on time. So any tips on like how to bring everyone, okay, it's time to practice and anything from either of you, because Lori, you're a teacher.
I was going to say, Sheri has given me a tool for some of the workshops that I train in, and that's just a chime. What's the word for it, Sheri?
I have like little hand chimes that I use that I can just bring everybody back. My funny answer was going to be, I just yell really loud and I say, hey, but I've never done that. I'm just joking. Yeah, I think it's sort of being present, even standing back up and saying, okay, let's go ahead and get started.
I love how your dog is like, I agree, Sheri. I agree. And I want to be on the podcast, and I'm going to be. I wanted to pop in here for a moment, connected yoga teachers, to tell you about a phone call that I had this week. So I was booking a boat tour for our local area because my oldest son is celebrating his 25th birthday soon and he loves boats. And it's perfect timing because, as some of you know, especially if you've been following along with my Instagram stories, Crunch is here visiting us. Yes, the infamous Crunch, who writes our show notes and our articles, who's been on our team for 5 years and who, up until yesterday, I had never met in person. So Crunch is here exploring Canada, and I wanted to make sure that we plan some fun things. So I get on the website to book the boat tour, and there are just a few glitchy things as I'm going through the booking system. So it required 2 names and 2 email addresses. That felt weird. I wasn't asked for any payment at any time. And then I didn't get a confirmation right away. And then I got 2 confirmations of the same thing. And so I was just feeling like, gosh, I hope this worked. I had some feelings of doubt come up. So I did what I always do. I just called the number on the website and I talked to Captain Colton. That's what his name is on the website. And he was super friendly and so helpful. And in that conversation, right at the beginning, we got chatting about how challenging it can be to run a small business. I let him know. And he told me that he was really fed up with his booking software. He was asking me some questions and realizing that it didn't work the way it was supposed to. And at that moment, I literally said to him, "Are you looking for a booking software? Because I have one that I love." And then I got on to telling him about how I've been using Offering Tree for years and how I talk about it all the time to yoga teachers and yoga studios. And then he tells me, "You know what? That's it. I'm going to check it out. If it's a company that you are recommending, you like them, you trust them, then I'm going to check it out and sign up." So I told him, even though he isn't a yoga teacher and he's probably not likely to listen to the podcast, I'll get him the discount code. And he said, "You know what? I'll listen to the podcast just to get the discount code." So if you are listening, Captain Colton, the discount code is offeringtree.com/Shannon. And I'm sharing this story with you, connected yoga teachers, because there were some hoops that I had to jump through to book that boat tour. And there were some moments of hesitation. And then I had to send an e-transfer later to pay because the booking just didn't work like it should have. And I don't want you to have that for your yoga students. I don't want them to experience where they go to book a yoga class or a workshop with you, and then there are some glitches. So, like I told Captain Colton, if you are looking for a software that's going to automate and simplify your business, that's built for yoga teachers and studios and people who run a boat tour business, check out Offering Tree. There's a free trial. And then if you decide to sign up, use our discount for podcast listeners over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. And I'll keep you posted on how the boat ride goes. Next week on the podcast, maybe, and I'll try and post to my Instagram stories. Now, I can also probably link to the website if anyone is interested in going out for a boat tour of the area around me up on the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. So I'll link to that in our show notes. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/332. Now let's get back to our conversation with Lori and Sheri. Okay, let's talk about commitment. Am I right that this might be related to tapas or no?
So when we're talking about commitment here, we're talking about it from, again, many layers. And so it's commitment to yourself as a yoga teacher, as a yoga practitioner, and as a yoga teacher. So as a yoga practitioner, it's important to remain dedicated to your own practice. I know when I started teaching, I was so excited to teach that sometimes I'd walk in and the teacher hadn't shown up, which of course I'm going to teach, but I would volunteer for all these classes. I'm like, I'll teach that. And then you'd ask me at the end of the week, "Did you practice this week?" And I'd be like, "Not personally. I helped a lot of other people practice." So it's committing to yourself and your own yoga journey. Committing to yourself as a yoga teacher, it's making sure that you are getting the certifications that you need, that you are taking care of yourself and treating yourself as a professional. And so even in this pillar in the book, we talk about how to get hired as a yoga teacher. Like, how do you present yourself? What are some of the things that you want to bring to the table for the different studio owners that you are trying to get in contact with, where you'd like to teach? How do you bring forth your benefits and kind of sell yourself? So there's sort of that business side of being a yoga teaching professional. And I think one of the very first things is to see yourself as a professional. I will tell you, I started teaching group fitness in the 90s. And at the time, it was sort of like, well, it's just this part-time gig. I just go and I got certified over the weekend. And now I show up and I start this music and I do this. We are yoga teaching professionals. And until we see ourselves and treat ourselves like that, it's hard for the rest of the world to see and treat us that way. So that's the next layer of commitment. It's commitment to your fellow teachers when somebody puts out a sub request. and there's like crickets. Nobody answers the group text. Nobody answers the email. If I can do it and I am iffy on it, I'll say, hey, I can be your backup, but I have this other thing that I need to move. But at least I've acknowledged it. If I can't do it, I want to say, I am sorry, I can't help you. But leaving this yoga teacher out there hanging, wondering, did anybody even get my text? So it's that commitment to your teaching team. It's things like if I'm a student in your class and I notice that the music is messing up or somebody's knocking at the door, I will get up off my mat and I'll give you the sign, I'll take care of this so that you can keep teaching the class for the rest of the students. And so it's that commitment to your teaching team. We also have a commitment from the teacher to the studio. What will you do as a yoga teaching professional here at this studio? Things like if you walk in and there's stuff all over the carpet because it's the middle of winter, will you clean it up? If the towels haven't been moved, if the studio for some reason didn't get cleaned last night, can you move the laundry over? Can you set up the cleaning solution? So it's what's my dedication to not just come in here and teach awesome yoga classes, but to really be a supportive part of the staff. And then we also talk about the studio's commitment to the yoga teacher. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And so commitment really it's a key, more technical function, I think, of our roles as yoga teachers.
Is this also where we, like you had said something about marketing or selling ourselves as yoga teachers? And I love that you use this word because we've had some pushback. This always happens when we talk about like marketing or selling. And I do want to talk about it more on the podcast, and we'll definitely do that in another episode. But I just want to highlight here how you said like this is part of it, and that commitment of like, if we're going to run this business and seeing ourselves as a professional. Sheri, you had shared with me, and I'm pretty sure you're okay with me sharing on the podcast, like, you know what it feels like to be a single mom of 3 and to be relying on your income and raising these kids and needing that income. So is there anything else that you want to say about marketing or sales in terms of commitment?
I will say that I do get the philosophy of we're here to practice yoga. And also, there is a whole business around it. I don't know, it's something like a $60 billion industry now that it's grown into. And to simply close our eyes and ignore that that is happening, I think is short sighted. And so, what I did, my undergrad is in business administration. And so, I brought in some of the things that I learned in one of my favorite classes, which was personal selling. And it was things like, what are your features, advantages, and benefits from a yoga perspective? Like what features, what are some tangible things? I have a 200-hour yoga teacher training. What are some of the advantages? I learned what's under that curriculum, and I can come and bring it here to your students. And what's the benefit? I love yoga. I have the background and the knowledge in order to teach it, and I have the passion in order to do that. Like, how will it make it easier for the person who's buying your services, which is the studio owner? But how do we position ourselves from a business standpoint? Because whether we recognize it or not, yoga is a business. And so we need to be able to bring in these same skills, these same tools that they use in the business world, and bring it into our yoga teaching practice and our yoga teaching business and the way we show up as yoga teaching professionals.
So good. Lori, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that class that Sheri liked would have been one that I would have not have liked. I do not like selling. However, I do kind of like marketing because what I think what it's about is finding your value, knowing what you can deliver to somebody. And in the yoga space, of course, we want to serve. So do nurses, so do teachers. But that's all business too. I mean, there's an exchange of energy. And so I think selling, I get the creepiness feeling of that, but I also think that if we reframe it towards knowing your value and being able to speak about your value, that's what's helpful.
Sheri, what would you add to that?
I will add in, when I graduated with my degree in business, which was marketing at the time, the thing that I said as the recruiters were bringing in companies, I said, the last thing I want to do is do sales. To me, that felt icky. I wanted to do marketing, advertising, public relations, retail. anything but selling. And so it took me a long time. It was probably 20 years into my marketing career when I did finally take a sales job, a selling job. It was at a chamber of commerce, and I was the director of membership and marketing. And what I found was, if I could look at it from a customer service perspective, like, how can I best serve you? How can I help you? I would have people come into my office, and my goal is I'm on commission and I want to sell you a membership. But as I heard their story, there were many times when I would say to them, this right now just doesn't make sense for you. And if we come from a place of how am I helping this studio owner run their business and meet their goals by bringing what I have here and serving their students, to me, that's a win-win. It's not sales, it's being helpful.
Yeah, that's so good. Lori, I love how you also use the example of a nurse, because right away it made me think, like, oftentimes nursing staff, yes, there are like medical procedures that they're doing, or their skills that maybe the average human doesn't have, but a ton of what they're doing is also like care and compassion. So someone might say, well, you can't sell care and compassion. No, but I'm going to pay this person who has those skills and offers this to my family member. Hopefully they're getting compensated and paid for this because it's really valuable. And so I know there's a big debate around yoga in terms of what are we selling, and it makes for those teachers who are uncomfortable selling yoga, that's fine. You don't have to sell yoga. You can like make sure that you pay the bills to like keep the lights on and buy the nice blankets that everyone likes and go to more yoga teacher trainings and give the yoga away, but you need to still get paid if you want to keep doing it. Yeah. All right, consideration. Tell us about that one, Sheri.
When I was doing those workshops at the health facilities and the yoga studios, we started with 4 pillars of powerful instruction, and those are the 4 that we've already gone over. About 3 years ago, I went to Gina Caputo is a yogi and a yoga teacher here in Colorado, and she's fairly well known. And she was doing a workshop in Salt Lake City, and I was living in Park City at the time. And I went down and took her workshop. And I went up to her after the workshop and I introduced myself and I said, I'm writing this book and I would love it if you would consider writing the foreword for the book. And she said, I'm absolutely open to reviewing it to see, but it has to match my philosophy. And so I sent her the pages, the drafts that we had done of the first 4 pillars. And she said, I'm absolutely, your philosophy is in line with my philosophy, especially one of the things that is at the core of this book is I don't profess to be the excellent, most best teacher in the whole wide world. What I've done is I've studied teaching, and that's what we're sharing here in this book. And she said, I really love that you are open to learning. And she gave us a lot of really good feedback. But one of the biggest things she said was, the 4 pillars are wonderful, but I think if you leave out diversity, equity, and inclusion, you are missing a huge amount of really important information, which is where the 5th pillar, the 5th C, came from, which is consideration. And that's teaching all students with compassion in diverse and meaningful ways. And so this chapter took the most research, a lot of reading, a lot of listening, a lot of learning, and then bringing that into this chapter to give yoga teachers the basis of what DEI is and some of the terms that we use: race, racism, privilege, prejudice, like just the basic core things to even consider. But it's also much more than that. It's not just your cultural background, your ethnicity. It's not your socioeconomic. It's things like your fitness abilities, your strength, your athleticism, your ableness versus maybe not as able to do something, and being able to adapt for that. So all of that came into the consideration chapter. And then one other thing that we added, I interviewed Jen Armstrong Solomon, who is a friend of mine, and I taught at her studio in Park City. And she's an expert in trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive yoga. And so I did a very intensive set of interviews with her and wrote 2 sections on that as well. Because I'll tell you, when I took my 200-hour teacher training in 2010, we never heard the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was not, and it was a great training, but it was not part of that curriculum. And I think the core of consideration is to better understand it and to have a curiosity to continue to learn. And so that's where consideration came from. And I will tell you, had we not gotten that feedback from Gina, the book would have been lacking in a very important area.
I remember you telling me about this at the yoga conference that we were both at a year ago. And I was just really thrilled to see that this was part of it. Because, like you, this also was not in my yoga teacher training at all. Like it wasn't even a consideration. And yeah, so I'm glad I'm here for it. I'm learning. Lori, anything else that you would add to that?
Yeah, we this chapter took the most research for us to do and it required the most learning for us to do, because the elephant in the room is that Sheri and I are both white, cisgender, able-bodied women. And so we had to figure out what we don't have from our own lived experience, and we needed to find resources of who people should be seeking out who do have these others. So we include some of those resources in the book as well. Ask people with these personal experiences. We had to uncover our blind spots, and that just writing that whole chapter was just realizing how many blind spots you have is opening up your blind spots. But we know that we're now on the path to questioning ourselves, and are we speaking from a blind spot now? Are we missing something important because we have the blinders on that we've always had?
Oh my gosh, I love this. The whole idea of like we can't see our blind spots. And this podcast has definitely put me right in the spot where like people will say, "Whoa, like whatever you're saying there today, Shannon, that's not working." And it's quite a gift, an uncomfortable gift, but quite a gift. So thank you both for including that. Is there any thing else that you've heard in terms of feedback from this work and seeing yoga teachers use this? Or was there anything that was like super surprising as you were doing the research into this?
The research for consideration came about shortly, well, all around what was happening with George Floyd and the riots and all kinds of stuff. So the media was very present as well. We were getting so many inputs about broadening those blinders that we have. And the tricky thing about them is we're blind to them until something pokes through, and then you go, oh, wow, I didn't even think about that. And I will say for all 5 of the pillars, I think the thing that we learned, we talked to a lot of yoga teachers. I did a Root to Rise pilot project with a range of experienced yoga teachers. So beginners all the way to, years and years and years of experience, assistant managers, and owners of studios. And so we were testing some of this information from the 5 pillars of powerful teaching and from the book. And what we found is that one of the biggest things that yoga teachers, especially when they come out of their teacher trainings, the biggest obstacle is confidence. They have the mechanisms or the mechanics of putting together a yoga class, but it's the confidence, I think, that brings them that's sort of like the soil underneath these 5 pillars. And so I think if we were to, and it starts with a C, so it goes in with our theme, but it's really the confidence, and we're boosting up the confidence in order to help people recognize these 5 pillars and start to do the work on them. And in the book, we have even assessments where we break down each of the pillars and talk about the different components of it. And we ask the teachers and the readers to assess themselves. How do you do on these components of communication? And on the ones that you score really high on, yeah, pat yourself on the back. That's a gift that you have. And what are 1 or 2 of them that maybe you're not as good at, and how might you improve that? And from my life coaching experience, we talk about action steps. We can talk about as much as we want in a coaching session, but the work is done between the sessions. And so when in the book, at the end of each chapter, there are questions for the reader to answer. And then there's also a place where there are action steps. And we ask them, from what you learned in this chapter, maybe from what you learned in this part of the assessment, what are a couple of things you want to work on? What will you do? How will I know? And by when will you do it? And so it brings in that accountability piece that creates change. Like Shannon, you were saying you like to start and end on time. Let's say that that's not my forte. I sort of want to show you everything I know about yoga, and pretty soon I'm 10 minutes over. I may choose you as my accountability partner and say, I want to have integrity with my classes. I want to start and end on time. And for this month, I'm going to report back to you that every class I teach, how I do with that action step to myself. And so we're really trying to encourage movement, not just reading the book, but actually doing something with the material that they have.
Ooh, I'm all for action steps. That's really great. I think that's, and it's just tiny little steps will make a big difference. Uh, where can people get the book and like how can they get their hands on it? Lori, do you want to tell us?
Yeah, our website is root2riseyogis.com. That's all letters, no, just all letters. And if you go there, you'll see our book page. And on that page, you can link to click over to Amazon and get it on a paperback. And if you would prefer to have it as a PDF, you can download it right there. You can also just find it on Amazon.
Oh,
it's called Standing Room Only, How to Be That Yoga Teacher, which is really the yoga teacher within you.
We'll make sure that we link to it in the show notes. And then I have a really exciting thing that you both announced is that we'll do a giveaway if our connected yoga teachers go to the show notes page. Connected yoga teachers, I wanted to pop in here for a moment with the link to the show notes page. So that's the connectedyogateacher.com/332. And then you're going to scroll down to the bottom of that page where you see the comment section. And here's what to comment to be entered into the book draw. Go to the show notes page and in the comments, tell us like one thing that you learned in this podcast or one question that you have or just a feeling that you have after you've listened. And then you'll be entered in the draw and we'll give away 2 books, which Lori and Sheri will take care of all of the mailing. So as long as Amazon can get to you, then I think they can get a book to you and we'll do the draw for that. So thank you both for saying like, yeah, we'll give 2 books to 2 lucky listeners of the podcast. That really means a lot. And so is that where they also go to follow both of you if they want to learn more from you and maybe they want to get on your email list? Do they also go to the same website?
They can get on our email list through the website. And we're also on Instagram and on Facebook at Root2Rise And so we give away a lot of yoga teaching tips. We've given away themes. We've got a lot of information and trying to open the conversation about our profession as yoga teachers. And so, yeah, we hope, and I'm thrilled to give away the books because really that is the main purpose of writing this book is to get this information out into the world and help yoga teachers do the job. And sometimes it's a tough job that they are called to do. And so I hope people will take advantage of that, make a ton of comments. We'd love to pull those winners out and get them the book.
So great. Thank you both so much for all of your time today. And thanks for putting this book together. Thanks for all of the work of compiling it and really also finding what makes a difference in that yoga teacher and making it into actionable steps that we can do. Thank you.
Shannon, it's been our pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you for this time of connection with you and your listeners. Thank you.
Thank you again, Lori and Sheri, for this fantastic list of the 5 pillars that we can use as yoga teachers. I'm so excited that 2 of our listeners get to win one of your books. And we'll also link to the book in our show notes and we'll link to Sheri and Lori's website as well so you can check that out. I had some big takeaways in this. I just love how Lori and Sheri were talking about how this communication is a 2-way street, that it's not all about the words we use as yoga teachers. It's really about listening to our students and really taking the cues that are coming, not even through the words said from your students either. Of course, I was in for the connection piece of things, of really thinking about how we can connect to our yoga community, how we can support each other as yoga teachers, how we can connect to local studios and connect to self. And I'm also so grateful that the conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion came into the book like later on. I know that Lori and Sheri worked really hard on that chapter, and it really rounds it out. It really adds so much. I have a copy of the book here. I am loving it. I cannot wait until 2 of our listeners win the book and it gets sent to your mailbox and you get to read it. And then let us know, tag us if you're reading this book. If you learned something from this podcast, make sure to comment so that you can be entered in that book giveaway. And I'm just really excited to hear how this episode supports you as you're really becoming a more experienced and more powerful teacher, and especially becoming a teacher that's more connected with the teaching style that is authentically you. As we close things out here, as I promised, Connected Yoga Teachers, I want to tell you about a couple of things happening inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. So if you want to hang out in real time, this is a place to do it. We had a live call in July, just recently, with Sandy Hilton on pelvic pain and intimacy. So you can check out the replay for that call along with all of the other guest expert calls. We have 2 yoga series that you can also take in there where you are the student. You can learn how to teach that specific way and then take that into your community. And we have a live call coming up. August 15th is our next live call. Shobana Mani is going to be talking to us about pelvic health and sounding. So we're going to do some vocalization, also known to some people, I know I can tell all of you, Connected Yoga Teachers, as chanting. And we're really going to experience the connection of our pelvic floor along with sounding and chanting. So if you want to check that out, visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Thank you so much to our amazing team who helped put this week's episode together, Suzanne Crunch and Sinead. Thank you for the work that you do in this world and for bringing this podcast to our listeners. Thank you so much, dear listener, for being here, for spending the time, for hanging out and really, asking, how can I become a more effective teacher? How can I connect more with my yoga students? So as usual, I want to leave you with a question. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?